Hello and welcome to the Football Reporters. The January transfer window in the Premier League is officially open. We'll tell you what we're hearing about what could be one of the most interesting windows in a while. Plus, the players that data tells us teams in the Premier League should be looking at and what could happen in Spain amid a three-way title race. Happy New Year. I'm James Olley, joined by Rob Dawson and Mark Ogden to discuss the January transfer window. How are you both? Are you expecting a busy month?
It's always a busy month work-wise, isn't it? Whether transfers happen or not, it's always a busy month.
I think this January will be busier than most, actually. I think the last few windows have been a bit of a letdown, but I think this January could be quite lively and, obviously some big names that could be moving.
Well, we start with the Premier League leaders, Liverpool, who have an 8-point lead going into January. But it's not incomings that the fans are worried about this month. It's outgoings or potential contract renewals, of course, of Virgil van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Mo Salah.
Salah's spoken quite a lot about his possible contract extension, and after the West Ham game said that they were far away from agreeing a new deal. As of today, Salah can start negotiations with clubs outside of England.
To discuss the latest, we're joined by Liverpool correspondent Beth Lindop. Happy New Year, Beth.
Happy New Year. Thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Mo Salah says in the media that he doesn't want this to play out in the media, but it seems to be getting his wish to some extent because the sort of reporting around this feels like it's quite a close shot from Liverpool's point of view.
Yeah, I think Liverpool find themselves in a position that no top club wants to be in, and it's partly a situation of their own making. We know that there was a bit of a vacuum of power at the top for a little while, and that is largely why these three contracts have been allowed to get to the point that they're at. And I think partly for that reason, Liverpool have been quite cagey about it in terms of what they've said externally. The sort of club line at the moment is that all three players are still locked in negotiations with the club. The club very much want to keep all three and tie all three down. I think speaking to people in and around the club and certainly within the fan base, that there is a growing sense that Salah and Van Dijk are probably more likely to stay than Trent Alexander-Arnold. We know there is explicit interest from Real Madrid for Trent Alexander-Arnold, and that how much of a factor that will play, I'm sure we'll find out a little bit more in the coming weeks. But yeah, it's a difficult situation for Liverpool to be in. It's one that they obviously don't want to find themselves in, and it's one that they certainly don't want to let derail the title hopes in the coming months.
Beth, there's also not really much noise about Alexander-Arnold or Van Dijk in the sense that obviously Mo Salah's made a couple of comments. I was speaking to somebody from Liverpool at the weekend at the West Ham game, and they were saying that if you look over the last 6 months, nothing has come out from the Liverpool end, and nothing's come out from the Trent or Van Dijk end, really. It's basically been Mo Salah. Whenever Mo Salah is time to talk about it, he's spoken about it, and that's it. And it's such a tight-run ship at Liverpool whereby the football department is taking care of this. And I've been told that even the CEO is not involved on a day-to-day basis. It's the football department who will report back. But at some point, something's going to have to happen. There's going to have to be a development. And does that have the potential to become a distraction in the sense that, let's say one player agrees a deal and the other two don't. Do they want more money then? Do they want a better deal? Or if one player decides to leave, how much could that destabilise where they are right now? Because as it stands, the only thing that could stop Liverpool right now seems to be the distraction that could be caused by these three players.
Yeah, I think Liverpool are fortunate in a sense that the team are doing so well on the pitch at the moment that is front and centre. And I think history dictates there will probably come a period over the next couple of months where they come unstuck a little bit, whether that just be the odd game here or there, or whether it be more of a sustained spell. But when things maybe aren't going quite as well on the pitch, if the contract situations aren't sorted by that point, then the narrative could become quite different. And it's very easy to see people starting to say, well, these contract situations are hanging over the players, and the tone of questioning changes a little bit. So I think it does have the potential to become a distraction. I also think for the players, it's not particularly pleasant to have to come out and answer these questions week in, week out. I spoke to Van Dijk after the Newcastle game a couple of weeks ago, and one of the reporters sort of said to him, any movement, and you could just see from the look of it on his face, he was just completely fed up of having to field these questions. But inevitably, they're going to keep on coming until movement is made. I think that it's quite interesting. The tone around Van Dijk and Salah is very different from the tone around Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think because he is a local lad and because he's been at the club since the age of 6, there's more sentiment from the fans and more pressure from the fans, I think, for him to come out and really front up to what is being said in the media. We know there's reports over in Spain that it's a done deal, and Liverpool have been very quick to sort of shut those down. There's been no decision made as of yet. But yeah, I think it does definitely have the potential to become a distraction, particularly if results start to go downhill a little bit.
Mark, there has been, aside from the talk of the new contracts, there has been talk of maybe one possible incoming at a left back. They've been linked quite heavily with Anthony Robinson, who's done really well at Fulham. I know you've written about this relatively recently. That's being played down, isn't it, by sort of sources inside Liverpool, and maybe they're looking at someone else possibly.
Yeah, so the Anthony Robinson thing has been there for a while now. Now we know that Anthony Robinson has had a great season at Fulham, arguably the best left back in the league, and there's a real shortage of left backs anywhere right now in the Premier League and in Europe. So Robinson's name has been attached to Liverpool quite a bit, but I've been told on more than one occasion that Liverpool have minimal interest in Robinson. And it's not because they don't think he's a good player. It's more a fact that he's 27 and he's not their age profile. He's a guy that has potentially had his career behind him. That might sound harsh, but Liverpool don't sign players for the long term who are 27 years old. Now, they probably do need to look to find a long-term replacement for Andy Robertson and Kostas Tsimikas at some point, but I don't think that'll happen in the next transfer window, maybe in the summer. And the name that has been put to me, I'm sure Beth has heard this as well, is Milos Kerkez at Bournemouth. Now, Kerkez is 21, had a great season at Bournemouth, and I think the significant element of that is that Richard Hughes, who's now Liverpool's sporting director, was at Bournemouth last season and prior to that, and when Kerkez came in. So there's a relationship there. He knows all about Kerkez and he knows what a great season he's had. And he would, again, fit the profile much better than Anthony Robinson, who, the 6 years difference. At 21, Milos Kerkez could be Liverpool's left back if he progresses for, the best part of a decade. And look how much success they've had with Andy Robertson. So Liverpool are playing the long game in terms of left back. Again, I was told at the weekend that they don't think they're going to be busy this January because they've got 2 players for every position. And that includes left back, like I say, Robertson and Tsimikas. So, but they will be in the market for a left back in the summer. And I think Robinson is a player that will have other people interested. And I guess, the likes of Man United, Arsenal are both looking for left backs, even Man City. I do think he'll be in the conversation at some clubs, but not for Liverpool.
Final question to you, Beth. I mean, Mark's just touched on it there in terms of January. Do you think anything else might happen with Liverpool, or I mean, I suppose if they get a sense that maybe one of those 3 contract rebels are not going to sign, do you think they might look to be proactive and maybe get someone in January or somebody unconnected to those 3 deals?
I think in the summer, the big buzzword was opportunistic. That was one thing that Richard Hughes said when he first came out and addressed the media after first getting the job. And I think that has pretty much always been Liverpool's approach, particularly in January windows. We saw them go in for Luis Diaz a couple of seasons ago because Tottenham were interested and Liverpool wanted him as a long-term target, and they decided to sort of go a little bit early with that one and get him in because they didn't want him to go elsewhere. So if they do have long-term targets that potentially could otherwise be on the move in the January window, I wouldn't be surprised to see Liverpool go for it. Arne Slot said in a press conference a couple of weeks ago that, Liverpool are constantly scanning the market. They're constantly, looking out for players who can come in and make this squad better. And I certainly don't think that if one of the long-term targets were to become available, they'd say, well, we're not going for it because it's January. Some of the best business has happened in January over the last few years. So I wouldn't be surprised if they brought someone in, but I don't anticipate it being a busy window. I think it very much will be if sort of the circumstances dictate that they need to move now rather than potentially losing out on a target. But yeah, I don't anticipate it being a massively busy window for Liverpool at all.
Yeah, it sounds like the same case at a few clubs. All right, well, thanks for joining us, Beth, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's Liverpool. Moving on to Manchester City. They are in 6th place now. They've obviously suffered with injuries and the squad has looked quite thin. They've made a lot of noises about being active in January. Rob, do you think they're going to come through on that they are going to be proactive and sign 1, 2, 3? I mean, how do you think they'll get on?
The expectation is that they will bring someone in. They're obviously looking for a number 6. That's their priority. There has been talk of sort of 3, 4 players that they're downplaying that element of it. They're sort of suggesting that if show me a team that has ever been able to make 4 top quality signings in January, it's just not possible. They're while they're not sort of downplaying the fact that they need help in midfield. They are downplaying that you can do an awful lot of business, particularly in January, because it is such a hard market. They've been linked with, they've looked at Bruno Guimaraes at Newcastle, Zubimendi at Real Sociedad. The problem that they've got with Guimaraes is that the money that Newcastle are asking for or would want is City considered to be out of their price range. Zubimendi is an interesting one. Obviously everyone will know that he was linked with Liverpool in the summer. Again, City have looked at him. The issue though with him is that City see him as a Rodri copy. And while that would be great for 6 months because it gets you through the second half of the season, he's 25 years old. So what do you do? If you're going to give him a sort of 5-year contract, what do you do beyond the end of the season when Rodri, you assume, is back and fit again? You can't have him sat on the bench. So there is an issue with him there. The one they like is Edison at Atalanta. Now, again, there are issues about whether they can get him out of Atalanta mid-season. Atalanta are top of Serie A. They're, I think, 13th in the Champions League table, so well within range of making the knockout rounds. So why would he want to move mid-season? While City are sort of saying that they are going to try and look, and it's obvious there's a huge hole in the centre of City's midfield, and at the moment, Pep Guardiola is trying to fill that with Kovacic. That's not his natural position, and Gundogan, again, not really his natural position, and also was a shadow of the player who left and went to Barcelona, and just hasn't reached the level since he's been back at City. So while City are expected to make proper attempts to sign a number 6, it's not a foregone conclusion. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about the January window all the way through this podcast, but it is. I'm sure fans are sick of hearing it. It is a really, really tough window to operate in, and I'm sure that we've all been told the same by the clubs that we cover. It's all well and good City wanting to do stuff. It's how you do it in January. It's a really, really tough window to work in.
I think there's a bit of managing expectations there as well, because you're right, clubs always bang that drum that it's going to be tough in January, but I think this January is a little bit different to others, that a lot of clubs do need people in, whether it's because of the amount of games that they're having to play, the injuries that a lot of clubs have suffered. But from City's perspective, yeah, Rob's right. I mean, those names are the ones that we're hearing, and each one is very difficult. I think Zubimendi is difficult because we know that getting players out of the Basque club Sociedad Bilbao is very difficult because of the favourable tax regime they have over there. But I've also heard that, obviously, we know that Liverpool have got an interest in Zubimendi. Again, that is something that is unlikely to happen unless Real Sociedad suddenly say he's available. But also Real Madrid, they're keen as well in the summer. So you potentially have Zubimendi with a choice of Man City, Liverpool and Real Madrid. And right now, as attractive as Man City would be from a financial perspective in terms of wages, would you risk what may happen down the line with the Premier League charges that City could be hit with, a points deduction, a fine? They may be at the Champions League next season, even worse, when in the summer you could go to Liverpool or Real Madrid. So that is an issue that City have to address. And I think, people at the club will say, it's not an issue, they'll get people in, but big players will have other options. And Man City, yes, they can pay massive wages, but it's not as attractive as it should be because of what is coming down the line, potentially coming down the line. Bruno Guimaraes is the same. A month ago, Newcastle were in a bit of turmoil, but now, they're pushing for top 4 again. They're in the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup. They've got, they've avoided Liverpool in the draw. They've got Arsenal, which Arsenal have hit a little bit of a tricky situation with injuries as well. So they could be in a cup final in 6 weeks. So Newcastle aren't going to be rushing to sell Bruno Guimaraes. So City's targets are not as gettable as they could be. They're no longer the superpower in the transfer market because of what's happened off the pitch. Now, also, that people might question this idea that players won't want to sign for City at the moment. Well, the last outfield player that they signed on a new contract was Kyle Walker in September 2023. None of their big guns have signed a new contract since. They've got a lot of players coming up for contract renewals. For whatever reason, these players are signing new contracts. Why is that? Is it because they're not sure themselves? Are their agents advising them not to go there right now? So City have got some obstacles to overcome, but the one thing that is in their favour, they've got a lot of money, a lot of cash to spend because they've made massive profits over the last couple of years in transfers, outgoing transfers in terms of players they've let go.
Now, Mark, you stole an idea from me that I put on this podcast a few weeks ago about the number of Man City players now flourishing elsewhere at other clubs. Obviously, Cole Palmer, Romeo Lavia. There are quite a few. Do either of you think that this recent downturn in form for City will mean that they might look to do things differently in the future in terms of trying to give these academy graduates a clearer path to the first team?
Well, I think they need to. I think, people look at Phil Foden as the example of Man City producing a great homegrown player, giving him time to develop. And that's what he did under Guardiola, to the point at times people are saying, when is Foden going to play? But I'm just going to read a list of players that have come through the ranks or been at Man City's younger element since Guardiola arrived at the club and have since left. So you mentioned Cole Palmer, Lavia, Morgan Rogers, Jadon Sancho, Taylor Howard-Bellis, Pedro Porro, Tosin Odarabio, Michael Elise, Liam Delap, Eric Garcia, James Trafford, David Brooks, Brahim Diaz, Alex Garcia, Felix Nemecha. Now, I'm not saying all those players would make a difference right now, but had City shown a bit more patience with some of those players and not moved them on, then they would be now forming part of the backbone of the team that could be the next Man City team. Now, I can't recall any situation where a club like Man United or Liverpool or Arsenal have developed homegrown players and let them go, the good ones. Liverpool were patient with Gerrard, Michael McManaman, Arsenal with Bukayo Saka, United, the class of 92, many others since. City have let them go a bit too soon. They haven't shown the patience to develop the likes of Cole Palmer, Morgan Rogers. Morgan Rogers left at the same time as Cole Palmer. Went to Middlesbrough, 6 months later was at Aston Villa. So now he's an England player. I think City have either decided that they don't want to be patient with these players because they can get players off the top shelf and put them straight into the team, or they haven't spotted their potential. I'm not quite sure what's worse there, the lack of patience or the lack of foresight. But they basically strengthened their rivals by letting these players go. Yes, they brought a lot of money in, over £400 million over the years by selling products. But, City got the best youth academy, bar none, anywhere in the world right now. No other club is producing players like that. And they will produce more. But they're going to have to be more patient. They're going to have to give these players time, because by not doing that, they're missing out on the next generation of the Man City team.
I mean, there's two things I'd like to add to that. One is that PSR is obviously a factor. Every club now knows the fastest route to profit is to sell their academy graduates. I mean, that's true across the board. Also, is there not something here about just the way that Pep Guardiola works? He likes to have a smaller group that he doesn't. I know that the schedule doesn't really allow for this now, but the idea that he doesn't want 25, he wants, say, 18, 20 players that he works with, and he rotates 2 or 3 maybe every game, keeps everyone fresh, uses a tight group. I think it's an interesting comparison actually with, obviously everyone talks about Mikel Arteta and Pep Guardiola, and obviously the fact that they work together and they share a lot of the similar ideas, good friends. But I know that there was there was some pressure on Arteta in the summer internally at Arsenal to start giving some of the academy guys a bit more of a chance, because of course Chido Obi Martin left Arsenal and joined Manchester United, and they lost 1 or 2 others who didn't really see a path to the first team, and it's one of the reasons why you're seeing someone like Miles Lewis-Skelly playing left back at the moment, when normally you might see Zinchenko fill in there. Calafiori is actually back fit, and Lewis-Skelly started the other night. Kieran Tierney's back and available, and yet he's also struggled to get game time, and Lewis-Skelly's been entrusted with that. You've seen Ethan Nwaneri come through a little bit more at Arsenal this season, and I think Arteta's responded to that internal pressure to actually give some of these academy players the chance to see that there is a pathway. Rob, do you think that maybe Pep's coming under a little bit of that at City?
I mean, it's possible. And Mark is right that they have an awful lot of players who they could give opportunities to. And they do like when they get players coming through, and the latest is probably Rico Lewis, who, for the first time this season has been a genuine regular. They do like to kind of bang that drum about how good they are at producing players and promoting players into that first team. Obviously, that you're right, that relies on Pep Guardiola, who ultimately has the final say. A, liking the player, and B, finding opportunities for that player to play. The only thing I would add is that I would put a lot of what's happened at City down to the individual players, because it's fair enough to say that the club need to have a little bit more patience, but also there have been cases where the players need to show that same patience too. And there were instances throughout sort of Phil Foden's career at City where it looked like he would have to move because he just wasn't getting the minutes. And he decided, for whatever reason at the time, to sign new contracts and to stay where he was, even though there was an awful lot of interest from other clubs and he could have moved. He decided to stick it out, and he wanted to stay. And he went through season after season when he barely played. And I think there are instances, particularly with the likes of Cole Palmer, Romeo Lavia. Now, obviously, it's the club's decision ultimately to sell those players because they're under contract. But also, Pep Guardiola doesn't like to keep players who have indicated in any way that they don't want to be there. So the minute that someone like Cole Palmer or Lavia or Morgan Rogers sort of says, well, I'm not getting enough opportunity here. I want to go and prove myself. The immediate answer from City is yes, because they just don't want a player there who doesn't want to be there. And they've shown that, whether it's an academy player or a first-team squad member, unless you're Bernardo Silva, who's never allowed to leave ever. Everyone else is allowed to go. And
that's because also, Rob, that's because that City had known for a long time they can just go out and buy somebody. And that's what they've always done. And I think that's the problem that they've hit.
But added to that, we did an academy feature on City earlier in the season, and we had Oscar Bob speaking as part of that. And one of the most interesting things that he said was that, there is a danger about, as a young player, signing for City at all. I mean, he came from Norway and moved to City. He said that his friends at the time said, why are you going to City? You're just not going to get the opportunities. And it was him who said, in the face of pressure from his parents, from his agents, from his friends, who said, no, I'm going to go there and I'm going to really try and break into that team. And he said there were instances again, when they signed players like, Jeremy Doku. People were saying, well, why are you sticking at City? You're just not going to play. And he said, no, I'm going to stay. I want to work under Guardiola. I'm going to get my opportunity. And this summer, for the first time, looked like he was going to be a first-team regular. Obviously, it's not really worked out because he's had a bad injury and he's only just kind of coming out. But he had to show himself an awful lot of patience to get that opportunity, because you're right, Mark, it's really, really hard. There are very few clubs in the world who can, on a whim, just go out and buy whoever they want. You're talking about probably two clubs, maybe City and possibly Real Madrid, who can go and do it whenever they want. And that, for a young player, is really, really daunting.
Well, across town, Manchester United, I think they featured quite heavily in your piece, Mark, about the potential January transfers that could happen. What are you guys hearing about? I mean, I know Ruben Amorim probably would want to change all 25, wouldn't he, if he had the option? But I mean, what's realistic for them this month?
Well, they have to be quite conservative and limited to 3 players that might leave Man United next month. But, I think that's probably wishful thinking. I think they have a season to get through. They've got players that they need to get to the end of the season. But I think the key one is Marcus Rashford, obviously. He was on the bench against Newcastle. He was on the bench against Newcastle on Monday night. Didn't get off the bench. And that was quite telling, because United were chasing the game and they needed a goal, and Ruben Amorim put him in. Now, I've been told this morning, actually, that, despite the fact that Marcus Rashford appears to have been frozen out, there is still a way back, and that he's still being very professional around the club, and it's not a Jadon Sancho situation, but it doesn't look like there's a future there for it. So it's clear that if United were to get an offer for Marcus Rashford, they would take it if it was anywhere close to what they deem valuable in terms of his value, whether that's a loan or a permanent transfer, because while he's there and not playing, he's just draining the wage bill and becoming an off-field distraction. But as we've discussed this before, finding somebody to take Marcus Rashford on a 3.5-year contract, £350,000 a week, thereabouts, it's going to be really tough, especially if he's not playing very well. That's the key, that his form doesn't justify anybody coming close to that. The other one's Anthony. Again, Anthony's been a bad buy from day one. He's on quite small wages, a small basic wage, around £70,000 a week, I'm told. So United could find a club interested in that in terms of paying his wages on loan. Again, who'd want to take him on loan? Maybe clubs in Turkey, perhaps. And Casemiro, he struggled against Newcastle on Monday night. He's struggled for a long time now. He's got 18 months left in his contract. If they leave it too much longer, Man United risk getting nothing from him in 18 months' time. So that is a player they would listen to offers for. I mean, the players that are also, out of contracts in the summer, Victor Lindelof, Harry Maguire. There's a lot of potential churn at United, but ultimately, I don't think it's going to be a busy window at United because they haven't got any money to spend. The only way that they can do business is getting people off the wage bill and maybe getting some fees. But Rob will know that is going to be, as we've said before, January is quite a hard window for lots of reasons.
Rob, are they? Do you think United are prepared to take big hit on players? Are they at the point where? And I'm sort of linking this back to Arsenal to some extent, into what they did when they knew they had to get rid of someone. They kind of paid them off to leave. But are they at the point where they're accepting that the market values that they pay for these players they don't exist? They were wrong. They're not there now. Or are they thinking, actually, we'll keep our powder dry in terms of selling as well, to hope that we have more of a market for these players in the summer?
Yeah, I mean, Mark is right that financially, the margins that United are working with are really, really tight. They're kind of downplaying the suggestion. I think there's been sort of stories out that they're kind of within sort of 2 million of their PSR margin. United are playing that down a little bit because they're sort of saying, well, the people who are making these calculations don't have access to the numbers that are given to the Premier League, the PLC numbers, are different to the numbers that you have to give to the Premier League. So, it's maybe not that tight, but they are sort of debating the fact that it is, close and that there isn't a lot of money to work with because of that. And to go back to your original question, they are prepared to be quite flexible. Now, maybe 18 months ago, it would be unthinkable that United would entertain a loan offer, say, for Marcus Rashford. Now, the message from United now is that is maybe something that they would have to look at if they're hoping to give themselves some wiggle room in terms of bringing players in. Now, if you could, get a loan fee for Marcus Rashford around sort of 4 or 5 million. Now, Marcus Rashford is worth more than 4 or 5 million pounds. But if you could maybe negotiate a loan to the end of the season, have him go somewhere else, maybe sort of reinvigorate himself and also bring in 5 million quid, that then you could go and do your own loan deal to bring someone else in, maybe a left wing back, which is a massive need for Man United. For the first time, there are people at United who are sort of suggesting that they are willing to look at that. And that would go for a lot of the names that Mark has just mentioned there. Anthony, Casemiro, no one is going to come in with an £80 million bid for Anthony. I would suggest that no one's going to come in with a £20 million bid for Anthony because he's just not anywhere near that level. He's shown himself to be nowhere near that level of player. But if there was a team that came in and said, look, we'll pay half of his wages possibly and give you 2 million, that is something that United are going to look at because the finances are that tight that they need to make money wherever they possibly can. The one thing I would say, and again, it's a message from Man United, is that January will also tell them a lot about how many more games they've got to play for the rest of the season. They've got an FA Cup tie at Arsenal that I imagine everyone thinks they're going to lose given current form. So if you go out of the FA Cup, you're not going to have any kind of cup run. So all the sort of fringe players there won't get games. Again, with the Europa League, you'll know by the end of January how many Europa League games you're going to play between now and the end of the season. Are you going to have to play that that's first knockout game, that extra 2 games, if you finish outside the top 8? Are you actually going to qualify at all? I mean, it looks like United are. So there are going to be Europa League games, but that will, again, determine how many players Amorim thinks that he needs to carry him through to the end of the season. And it's possible that if United go out against Arsenal, that the likes of Lindelof, Eriksen, Rashford, Casemiro, Anthony, even Bayern, all of them really, they're just not going to play. So again, you may look at deals that perhaps you wouldn't have done a year ago, A, because of the finances, and B, because there just aren't going to be enough games to go around.
I think you could probably add Joshua Zirkzee to that list as well because of what happened against Newcastle on Monday, the fact that the manner of his substitution and the treatment at the hands of the fans. I know there's been a bit of a lot of people are trying to kind of, show some sympathy for what happened, but obviously we know that he was substituted on 31 minutes and the fans cheered him going off and he went down to the tunnel, to the dressing room, came back. But he's had a difficult time at United since signing from Bologna, a £35 million deal. But there's been a lot of speculation that Juventus are quite keen that they're taking him back to Italy. His reputation is still quite strong in Italy, so that would be a real admission of defeat if United were to let Zirkzee go back to Italy. But I think the situation is quite a unique one there because of what happened against Newcastle and the way it turned out for him recently. But we're just flipping to you, James, in London. With Chelsea, Arsenal, Tottenham all look like they could do something. I think Ange Postecoglou has already said that Spurs are already lining up deals, and Chelsea obviously see every window as an opportunity. So what are you hearing? Is there any chance of any decent deals happening in London this window?
Yeah, I think there's certainly ambition to do it more than I can remember in recent years, actually, across those 3 clubs. We start with Tottenham. I mean, the issue that they've got is that it's a case of whether they either look at what they need now or what they're trying to build towards in the longer term, because they are 2 different things. If you go back sort of 3 or 4 weeks, Postecoglou's on record saying that he feels that they need to strengthen 1, maybe 2 attacking positions over the course of the next sort of year or so. Because he just felt they Richarlison not always consistently available, and then when he's fit, he's not always reliable in front of goal. Obviously, Heung-min Son has been a fantastic player for Spurs, not quite the player perhaps that he was, who's certainly in a bit of a slumping form in any case at the moment. There's obviously question marks about his contract situation, given that there's some uncertainty there. So they're looking, and they have been for a while, at attacking options, but actually it's at centre back and really left sided of their defence, the left back and left sided centre half, that is really the issue for them this month. But again, to repeat really what's been said about the other clubs, it does come into play about who can you really get in this window. I think they'll be looking more at squad depth rather than trying to sign players that would improve the first team when everyone's fit this month. If you think about, so a couple of their longer term centre back targets, Gonçalo Inacio at Sporting Lisbon, and Milan Skriniar at Paris Saint-Germain. It's difficult to see either of those being allowed to leave in January. So, again, you're in that sort of conundrum of, well, do you compromise and try and get someone in that you're not entirely sure about this month because you can, or do you wait and risk exacerbating the injury problems that they've already got? So that's kind of where Spurs are. I mean, for Arsenal, it's one of those situations where they kept their powder dry in the summer in terms of trying to sign another attacking player. When they went out of the Champions League to Bayern Munich, the word from the hierarchy then was, we need one more. We need one more, whether it's at 9, whether it's a wide forward who can play as a 9, but we need one more. And they decided when Benjamin Sesko signed a new contract to Red Bull Leipzig that they keep their powder dry and wait. There is a feeling at Arsenal that they might be able to get him next summer. I can't see that happening in January, but of course we never know if a club comes in with a big enough money and Red Bull decide that they want to do a deal, then things can change. But the injury obviously to Bukayo Saka, and then off the back of that, rate Sterling, although apparently that's not as bad as first feared, has just left them feeling, I think, what they already knew is that they're a little bit short in those attacking positions. And maybe if they can get one more in, then they would do that this month.
Joe, just jump in there on Arsenal, on your forward, because we know that Arsenal need a centre forward. It's been a long-term thing, and they're going to have to spend a lot of money to do it. Now, if the situation arose where Alexander Isak, for instance, is having a great season at Newcastle, Eddie Howe said just last month that they can't offer him a new contract at the moment because of the club's PSR situation. So Isak is out a new deal. The fact that Newcastle have got issues with PSR themselves, would Arsenal have the finances or the confidence to make a move for someone like Isak, or is it a case of just waiting to the summer because Isak, Gyökeres are just too expensive to do right now?
I don't think. Okay, so Gyökeres is easier to deal with because I'm not sure they're that keen on Gyökeres. I know that there's been a lot written about that, and they've certainly scouted him, and he's certainly on their list, if you like. But I think he's quite a long way down that list. And if you're talking about the kind of money that we are, I don't think you can go to sort of your third or fourth option on that list for that money. So I think that deals with him. Isak's a bit different. They do like him, and they have scouted him for quite a long time. I heard a number, 150 million has been quoted for him this month. I mean, I don't think Arsenal could do that deal. I don't think there are many clubs in the world that could do that, but I don't think Arsenal could do that this month. Could they find an agreement closer to 100 million and find the money to do that? Yeah, I think they probably do have the scope to do that if they really wanted to push the boat out. But of course, there is this other situation with Arsenal at the moment, which is that they don't have a sporting director. Jason Ato is the sort of acting interim sporting director, and he's stepped up and he's very highly rated. Everybody you speak to at London Colney sort of talks about this guy in really glowing terms, but he doesn't have the experience of acting sort of in a big window on his own, leading a transfer of that size. So there is a little bit of uncertainty about whether Arsenal possess the expertise to get a deal like that over the line this month, especially when you consider that they are also looking for a sporting director. Mikel Arteta is involved in that, but he's the head coach, but the guy who's coming in should be his boss. It's all a bit odd. So, yeah, I think the odds are against it. Let's put it that way.
And again, just chucking a name, because it's been doing the rounds. It does seem quite unlikely, but Marcus Rashford has been linked with Arsenal a little bit. Now, it would potentially solve a short-term problem with Saka being out, but obviously Marcus Rashford has baggage. Would Man United deal with Arsenal? Well, is it a deal that could suit both parties, or is it one to forget about completely?
It's one that I think would have made sense to some extent had they not already taken a gamble on a winger who was out of form and looking to kickstart himself in Raheem Sterling, because that's not gone very well. Sterling really, there have been so many games where we've been looking at the bench thinking, well, he's got to bring Sterling on for at least 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, give it. And he doesn't seem to trust him at the moment, whether what he's seeing in training isn't isn't enough, or whether he's been carrying that knee problem that we now know he has for a while. Whatever it may be, the Raheem Sterling deal's not worked out. So I think to gamble on another one, on another kind of potential winger who used to be good and, maybe he could come good again and let's give him an opportunity, it just feels like a step too far. But look, if they get right to the end of the window, and this is what happened with Sterling, even on deadline day morning in the summer, they were done. They'd finished it. But the offer came in from Chelsea to say, look, the numbers are so inviting that they decided to take a punt. So you couldn't rule it out entirely, but I think having done the Sterling deal, you can't really see them going again down that path with a Rashford.
The one thing I'd add on that is that United are certainly not ruling out the possibility that they would do a deal with another English club for Rashford. And I know that lots of Man United fans may look at that and think, well, that's just crazy, because why would you want to strengthen a rival? But ultimately, United haven't really got rivals in the top six at the moment because where they are in the table. So United certainly aren't ruling out the possibility that they could, talk to Arsenal or Chelsea. What they won't do, they've said, is a Sterling to Arsenal type deal where, as I understand it, James, you'll know more than me, but Chelsea are still paying the overwhelming majority of those wages. So United wouldn't do a deal in that sense. They wouldn't have a situation where they were paying Marcus Rashford 90% of his wages to play for Arsenal or Chelsea. But certainly there is a willingness to talk to those clubs or clubs in the Premier League if that's the best option for Rashford. It's certainly not one of those situations where they're just, flat out ruling out that he can play for another English club and they want to do a deal with Spain or a club in Saudi Arabia.
It's hard to see where his market is actually, Rashford. I mean, I put Rashford to Postecoglou a few weeks ago, and he sort of, was quite dismissive of the idea of signing him. To Tottenham would make more sense to me, really, because I think that they, as we've already established, they need to bolster those attacking options. It's something that they feel they need to do in the longer term, and they could kind of take a gamble on Rashford, really. They're in a better position to do that, I think. They've got players, like Timo Werner, who've not really kicked on. Lucas Bergvall is young, not really sure what we're going to see from him. I could see Rashford, particularly given that he could play as a 9 potentially as well. And I know that's another debate, and United probably don't feel that he could, but there's certainly the versatility there to occupy those two positions. It would make sense to me, but Spurs are very much playing it down. And just finally to touch on Chelsea, I just think, I think from their point of view, they've obviously done such a large amount of business in the last 3 or 4 windows that I can't see them doing anything major. They may look to try and again add 1 or 2 of the youngsters to the longer term sort of game plan that they have. But I think it's kind of outgoings really. There's still quite a few members of the so-called bomb squad, the group of players that were exiled and sort of told that that you have no future. There's sort of Ben Chilwell, there's Keita Dyes in there as well. Chukwuemeka is another one who will probably go. So, there are outgoings, I think, are the priority for Chelsea this month. Well, that's enough from us now. We'll be back at the end of the show. Our team in Spain will tell you what to expect from Barcelona, Real Madrid and Atleti. But first, our data guys, Ryan O'Hanlon and Bill Connelly, will be here after the break to look at what the stats tell us about how spending money in January improves performance in the second half of the season, and whether top Premier League clubs might need to strengthen and where they might need to do that.
Moving on from what our reporters in Europe are hearing about the January transfer window, we've got 2 nerds in America to discuss how data can perhaps improve teams' decision-making in January. I'm Ryan O'Hanlon, joined by Bill Connelly. To start, Bill, I think we both use a lot of data in our writing for team assessment, player assessment, but we ultimately want to use it to sort of get a better handle on decision-making, how teams can make better decisions. And more broadly, how do you think of the January transfer window? Is it a place to avoid at all costs? Is it a place to find value? How do you see it?
Well, I mean, right out front, obviously it's a good time to account for injuries that have happened over the first half of the season, filling holes, things like that, short-term solutions. You can absolutely, I think, find some value there. But really it just comes down to, do you know what you're doing or not? Like Liverpool got Virgil van Dijk in the January window. That worked out relatively well. But then Barcelona went and just had money, burning a hole in their pocket and went out and spent 130 whatever on Coutinho a few years ago too. So really it just comes down to, are you showing patience? Did you maybe not quite get deals done over the summer and now you have everything in line? That works out pretty well. But if you're really just looking to light money on fire, you can do that too. It probably won't work out as well.
Yeah, it's funny mentioning Coutinho, who also moved to Liverpool in January.
That's right. That's right.
So both one of the worst and best January transfers ever. And I think the reason why, historically, if you try to compare deals across both windows, January transfers for similar players cost around 20% more than they do in the summer. And I think that's because, right, like most teams in professional leagues in Europe have something they're playing for at this point. They're either trying to avoid relegation, they're trying to qualify for Europe, or they're trying to win the league. Yep. So you have like a very small subset of teams in Europe, at least, that can afford to lose their best players, basically. And since that's the case, and like you said, there are teams that have like urgent needs all of a sudden with injuries, or they find themselves lower in the table or higher in the table than they thought. I think January ends up being way more of a seller's market than a buyer's market. And, you look at the data for what actually you get for signings in January. I recently wrote a piece about this. You find a correlation of per $20 million spent, an increase in 0.05 points over the rest of the season. So if you spend $400 million on transfer fees, you would average an increase of 1 point in January.
I mean, that's something, I guess. I'm curious, by the way, if we've got more teams involved in potentially making the Champions League knockout rounds, including, the PSVs of the world, the Portuguese clubs in a given year, I'm curious what that means because, that's usually where the big clubs go to land up and comers, especially. And if they really think they can make a lot more money making it a couple rounds into the Champions League knockouts, curious what effect that has. It has, Enzo Fernandez was, Benfica was amazing in the Champions League in the first half of that season, and they sold him anyway. So maybe it doesn't make a difference.
Well, yeah, those teams have to balance, right? Like the fact that they can get more for their players probably in January than they would in the summer. And you add in the fact that we don't even know what European leagues are going to have 5 teams in the Champions League next year. So all these other teams can convince themselves that maybe we're going to get the 5th team, and maybe, we're currently in 8th, maybe we can qualify. So I wonder if that will suppress some movement. But all that said, you can still find ways to improve your team in January, even if it's not likely. So let's quickly touch on the teams in the title race in the Premier League. If there's maybe we want to start with Liverpool. You look at Liverpool, do you see any immediate needs for a team that seems to be getting better with each week?
Right. I would struggle with the idea of messing with anything right now if I'm Liverpool, because things are working pretty well. Like you've mentioned, obviously they need a long-term left-back solution. Andy Robertson is still really good on one end of the pitch, but is increasingly less good on the other. And so if you're looking at an Anthony Robinson or somebody else within the Premier League, especially if you can get that guy, then I would say you do it, but I don't know that you can right now, especially if even Fulham are playing for something in terms of, a spot in Europe next year. So I don't know if that's available. They're not going to panic. This isn't a panic club. But if that is available, that would be the first place I look. I know you talked about a holding midfield as well.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Gravenberch has suddenly become one of the most indispensable players in the league after not playing all that much last year. But we have seen Wataru Endo contribute to a really good team in the Premier League last year. So maybe he'll eventually gain the trust of his coach, even though he's barely played. So they seem well set for the rest of this season. I think going beyond this season, there's a ton that's probably going to have to be done potentially. But for a team that signed one player, and I don't even know if Federico Chiesa exists anymore. It seems unlikely that they're going to do anything irrational in January. Yep. But another team that perhaps might need to do something is Arsenal, who one of the best, if not the best defensive teams in the world, probably the best team at set pieces in the world. But from open play, by basically any metric, you want fancy metrics like expected goals, you want basic metrics like goals. We're just an average Premier League team. and their best player, in my opinion, the most important player, Bukayo Saka, is out. It seems like until at least March, perhaps longer. Who knows? So they both need, I think, an immediate replacement for Saka. They need someone that can play for Saka so he doesn't keep getting injured in the future. And they also just need better attackers, I think, to improve their attack.
I think from a number standpoint, we're both in love with a certain winger from Brentford who I've written about a couple times. You've written about a couple times. He keeps coming up in the data. And if Brentford isn't playing for anything right now, it almost feels like they're one of the ones who aren't playing for anything right now in the Premier League. Just they're safe, but they're not looking at top 5, 6, 7. Bomo seems like a great addition if you can pull him away. Arsenal obviously has the money to do so, but it seems like he'd be a guy who he's not the most versatile player in the world, but he can still, I think, play a role. And what we've seen this year is Odegaard, Saka. That is anything good that happens in open play requires both of them. They're going to need something in that regard on the right side.
Yeah, and Bomo is sort of the classic player who, like, maybe his stats don't stand out in one particular category, but when you add up all of the things he does, he looks incredible. He's the right age. And I do think Brentford are the team that, of any team in the league, they're going to understand the dynamics of this market, where they stand. They're going to have a realistic expectation of how good their team is, where they finish. And I think they're probably aware of the fact that relegation isn't likely. Europe also isn't likely. And, maybe you can get 70 million for your player instead of 50 or 80 or something like that. And I think for Arsenal, he can play on the right wing, but then he can also play anywhere else in the front three when Saka is back. Yeah. So I think he would be a good fit if a big money move like that could happen. The other potential title chaser, Chelsea, if you can't make it work with this massive squad, I don't know what to tell you.
No, I mean, this is kind of a, roll up the newspaper and just like, no. They'd have too many players already. I think they could absolutely upgrade in midfield a little bit, or at least add depth in midfield. And, left back, some people love Cucurella, others not so much. You could probably upgrade there either way, but you just can't. You have too many players. You spent too much money already. You took 2 years building this squad to see what it could do. So now you have to just see what it can do. It seems like it can do quite a bit right now.
Yeah, and I think they're given preseason expectations. They're very likely to finish top 4. A title race is a title win is just, in my opinion, is not very likely, and as we've seen over the past couple of games, they weren't as good as their point total. So I think hanging on to the team now and maybe trying to make changes along the fringes.
And here's where they spend 200 million on Osimhen or something, just because yes, it seems to be what they do.
Yeah, Nico Jackson having a good season just somehow will be enough to convince them they don't need another striker.
No.
So before we get out of here, anyone else beyond the title race that stands out to you? I know Nottingham Forest are sort of a beloved team of yours. Anything stand out there? Any other clubs that come to mind for you?
Well, I am really curious what Forest and Bournemouth convince themselves they can do. Obviously, one of those two clubs is much more open to writing big checks than the other. Bournemouth has built a little smarter than Forest did. Forest just threw as much money as possible out there, got as many players as possible, desperately tried to hold on for a couple of years, and then held on, and now they're good. I'm really curious what they think they can do. It'll tell us a lot about whether they're really aiming for top 5 in Champions League or whether they're just hoping to get, a Conference League bid or something. But no, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, what the desperate rich clubs do, the Spurs and the Uniteds of the world as well. But like I said, if you're well run, you'll probably do fine in January. But not all those clubs are well run.
Yeah, we didn't think Nottingham Forest were well run. We didn't think Chelsea were, but their both strategies seem to at least be paying off this year. Quickly touching on the big clubs, I think Man City, we almost don't even need to talk about it. They need like as many midfielders as possible. And in my opinion, Tottenham, just a pretty bad injury crisis, but I think that they could make a late season run, but they do seem kind of stuck in that middle zone where it's not worth taking the risks in January, just kind of accept that it's probably a lost season already and move on. And I think that's doubly true for Manchester United. They're worse than Tottenham. They're lower in the table. Just they don't like getting an immediate improvement in January, spending an extra 30 million on a guy that you could get for cheaper in the summer doesn't make any sense. That said, I'm not going to put my money on them not doing that. So go do anything, Manchester United, even though we know you're going to.
Hey, Bruno Fernandes, he was a January signing, so you never know.
That's true, as was Wout Weghorst, I believe. So, the yin and the yang. All right, we'll wrap it there, and now we're going to send it over to Spain, where our reporters are going to look at Barca, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, and what the transfer window might hold for those three clubs.
Hi everybody, welcome to Spain. Alex Kirkland here, and I'm joined to talk all things La Liga by my colleagues Sam Marsden. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Alex.
And Rodrigo Faez. Hello, Rodri.
Hi, Alex. Happy New Year.
Likewise. Lots to talk about, as always. Sam, I feel like we have to start with you because Barcelona, as always, have kept you busy over the festive season, which I'm sure you appreciated very much. It's all about Dani Olmo, who you might remember was Barca's star signing last summer. And they've been in a race against time, Sam, to see if they can actually get him registered to play the second half of the season. So maybe it's worth reminding people like how they got into this mess and where we are at the time of recording.
Yeah, well, I just want to preface this answer because obviously this is going out on New Year's Day. We're recording before New Year's Day, and that's important for two reasons. One, for the Dani Olmo situation, but two, because Rodrigo shamed me there by saying Happy New Year. So I'm going to wish you a Happy New Year as well to start with.
Doesn't matter when I say that.
Then we're gonna get to the Dani Olmo situation. So this has been an ongoing saga really since the summer when he signed. Obviously, he missed the first couple of games of the season because Barca couldn't register him within their La Liga imposed annual sort of spending limit, if you will, which meant he wasn't registered until the end of August. When he was registered, it was under a sort of a rule which La Liga allows players to be registered up to 8% of an injured player who's out for a long-term injury. So that was how he was registered, but it was only a temporary registration until the end of the year. Really sort of complicated stuff. Basically, that was expiring on December the 31st. As of recording, Barca still haven't managed to extend his registration. They've had a court hearing last week with La Liga where they argued sort of against the Liga's interpretation of their own rules. They argued sort of in favour of workers' rights, saying that, look, Dani Olmo's registration needs to go through for the second half of the season. It was a similar situation to one they had with Gavi when they promoted him to the first team in 2023, which they won that hearing. They didn't win this one. It was turned down. But they are still hopeful that, we're waking up in the new year with Dani Olmo registered. There were a couple of avenues there, taking it to a second court. There's less optimism with that one, but they've taken it that route. They're working on another palanca, if you will, these financial levers of the summer of 2022 when they sold, future television rights, percentages of, future business, etc. In terms of the new Spotify Camp Now in selling VIP seats, a percentage of them for the next whatever amount of years. We don't know the exact terms yet, what they're working on. If they can get that through, that would create more space within their salary cap. And the third one, something they've used before, is directors or a president, probably not the president, probably be a director who can sort of put up a personal guarantee to guarantee almost sort of registration for the second half of the season. It's something they used before to register. I think it was Jules Koundé at the end of that 2022 summer transfer window, and last season to just get the last bits of João Felix and João Cancelo registered. So the club are confident, optimistic that this will happen, as they have been in every window. We've had the situation with, Christensen, Kessie, Koundé, other players. And now this summer, it's gone to the wire more with Olmo. The fact he missed games was significant. A player hasn't missed games before. Koundé did, but he was genuinely injured before he was registered. Olmo wasn't really injured. It was kind of an excuse. And now, it's crazy that they let it run to the last 48 hours of the window and had the risk of potentially losing him for the second half of the season.
It does feel a bit like they almost love the drama. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if it's Joan Laporta or who, but because they do this. Like you say, they keep doing this. It's not even like, I know there's an imperative to improve the squad and sign players, but they don't have to go and buy Dani Olmo. It was a position they didn't necessarily need to strengthen in. They did it knowing they knew this would happen, but it's almost like they kind of think, oh, we'll find a way, we'll figure it out, we'll get it done, as you say. Yeah,
like you say, at the time they had, they still had Ilkay Gundogan. They didn't have to go out and sign Dani Olmo. They were still sort of quite well stocked in that position. You can talk about the merits of Dani Olmo and whether he's an upgrade or not, but it wasn't like they didn't have anyone in that position and they needed to go out and spend the 60 million. Obviously, Laporta is someone who loves to make signings, to be associated with signings. So there's that element of, having the new shiny thing. He just won the Euros with Spain. He'd had a good Euros, etc. And he's been a long-term target. He's from Barcelona. There's that added layer of glamour. But like you say, absolutely not an essential signing at that stage of the window. I don't know about the drama. I guess I sometimes wonder with Barca if there is an element of, it's just always good to be in the news and to have your name out there. I don't know, but there's a lot of sort of mocking that goes on about these financial situations as well, which can't help the club's image.
Yeah. Should we talk about Real Madrid's, Rodri? Because as Sam said, by the time everyone hears this, the almost situation will have been resolved one way or the other. A situation that won't have been resolved is that of Trent Alexander-Arnold. There was a big front page from Marca here in Spain over the weekend saying that Trent wants to come to Real Madrid. What can we say in terms of what we know about this situation right now, Rodri?
Well, first of all, Real Madrid are really interested on Trent Alexander-Arnold. This is a reality. This is a fact. Despite the reports from Marca with that front cover or some other media reports in Spain, I don't think it's a deal done for Real Madrid and Arnold, because I understand that Arnold is still in talks with Liverpool in order to renew his contract, and I think it's a bit soon for that. What we know is that Real Madrid, again, they are really interested on signing Arnold, first of all, because if they sign him for the next summer window transfer, they're not going to pay any transfer fee to Liverpool. And this is something that Florentino Perez is really aware of. So he can save some money for some other signings.
He's done it a lot, right? We've seen it in recent years with Alaba, with Rodrigo, with Mbappe, of course.
Yeah, it's the way they sign now on Real Madrid. And this is something interesting, no? Because it gives you a clue, a really good clue, what they are looking for now in the market. But, on the other side, we know that they are being in touch between Real Madrid and the players' camp, and they are open to hear or to listen to what Real Madrid are going to say. And Real Madrid, they need a right back, because after what happened to Dani Carvajal, we reported on ESPN that Real Madrid were going to monitor the market. They couldn't find anything better than Arnold, because we know the quality that the English player have. But at the same time, it's like, okay, should they wait a little bit longer to get Arnold for free in June, or should they sign something now for January? They don't really like the January market, because
they don't do the whole emergency signing thing, do they? They try and avoid that. They've got their long-term plan, their strategy, and they don't like to deviate from it at all.
And I agree with what Florentino Perez thinks about the winter window transfer, because he thinks that it's a very expensive market, and secondly, they couldn't find what they are looking for now at the moment. Like, for example, Arnold, which is a priority for Real Madrid, because there is no one better now in the market rather than the English player. So I guess that they are not going to get anything for January. They are going to see what Raúl Asencio or some players at the reserve team can add to the first squad, and they will have to wait a little bit longer to see if finally Arnold is coming to Madrid or staying at Liverpool, because this is something that is on the table now at the moment.
And in terms of Trent, I don't know about you, but it seems to me like he kind of solves two problems for Real Madrid. One is that, like you say, they need a right back, both short term and longer term, as a successor, Dani Carvajal. But also, what we've seen from Madrid this season, the sort of the lack of creativity we've seen from them from deeper, the fact that Toni Kroos hasn't been replaced. Alexander-Arnold's the player, in terms of his range of passing, it's almost as close to Toni Kroos as you can get. Of course, he's not a Toni Kroos-like player, but he can do some of those things, right?
Yeah, for me, Real Madrid this season, they have two main problems. First of all, in the right back. Secondly, in the center back, because, after what happened to Militao, again injured for the whole season, they don't really have a quality defender to replace the Brazilian center back. And again, Toni Kroos, we know it. I mean, it's a bit late in this season to see, okay, they are still trying or struggling after retirement, and there is no one who can replace Toni Kroos at the moment. We know, and we reported on ESPN that they are really aware of the, Florian Wirtz Bayer Leverkusen player, because they wanted him to see how he was developing this year at the Champions League. But again, he's not like Toni Kroos. And that is why Camavinga is not like Toni Kroos, Tchouaméni is not like Toni Kroos, Valverde is not like Toni Kroos. They have a great problem there, because I think there's no one now in the market that could replace Toni Kroos. They have to struggle, and indeed they have to change the maybe the tactic or whatever. But I mean, this is going to be something impossible. An impossible mission for Florentino Perez, because there is no one like Toni Kroos in the market.
Before we finish, I guess we should have a very quick word about the La Liga leaders right now, who are not Real Madrid, who are not Barcelona. It's Atletico Madrid. They are top of the table. We've got this proper three-way title race here in Spain. I saw Atleti being described as spectators in the January window in one of the papers this morning. I think it was Diario AS. Do we think that's a fair assessment? It feels like they did their business, and a lot of business, in the summer, right? And they haven't got much to spend now, I don't think.
Well, I don't think it's about the money. I think it's just about that Simeone couldn't find the key player that he needs for the midfield. If you ask Simeone, he would say that he needs someone to replace Koke, or to be, playing by Pablo Barrios, but it's not enough for Simeone, because he needs someone else in that midfield line. The thing is that, first of all, again, what we just said about Florentino Perez and Real Madrid, they think at Atletico de Madrid that the winter window transfer is very, very expensive. And secondly, they couldn't find now what they are looking for. And maybe they have to wait till summer, because it doesn't look like Atletico de Madrid are going to sign anyone in January. But again, if you ask Simeone, he would tell you that he needs someone else there, because Koke is not a starter anymore at Atletico de Madrid, which is something like interesting to analyze. And secondly, Pablo Barrios is proving that he's more than capable to be there. But anyway, there's just one. I mean, he's only one player, and he needs someone else in order. Imagine that he got injured again, as he's been in the first part of the season or whatever, and they need one replacement at least. But it looks almost impossible for Atletico de Madrid to sign anyone.
All right, so watch this space. Okay, that's all for now. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to bring you the latest from La Liga and the transfer window, and also talk about my trip to Saudi Arabia next week for the Spanish Supercopa. For now, it's bye-bye from me.
Well, to finish this week, we thought it would be important to tell you how we report transfers, where, how, and why we get our info, and how we decide what to report, what to keep in mind, and what to ignore. Guys, I mean, it's it's not an exact science, this, is it? Very, very difficult to sort of separate truth from fiction at this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, it's a minefield, and I'm sure that both of you would attest to that. I'm always reminded of when United signed Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and that we sat down with Ed Woodward after that, and he said that they'd landed on Wan-Bissaka, having started with a list of 804 or 904 right-backs. Now, that shows you how far that clubs spread the net when they're looking for transfers. Obviously, it's boiled down a little bit, sort of, when it gets to the point of speaking to agents and people around players to find out about their character and whether they even want to move. But what you're left with is an awful lot of people who know about possible interest. Players then get excited. Agents then want to tell other people that, such and such a big club is interested in my player. And it snowballs. And what United have found, probably as much as any club, is that they're linked with and speculation about hundreds and hundreds of players. And there was an instance not that long ago, around sort of 2020, where they were genuinely having discussions about having a Man United spokesman Twitter account to kind of tell fans what was true and what wasn't, because they were so tired of the speculation around transfers and what they would be doing, what they wouldn't be doing. There was one particular one with Sergio Reguilon when he was doing quite well at Sevilla, and United were looking for a left back. They'd had sort of tentative interest in Reguilon, but moved on very, very quickly and ended up signing Alex Tellez. What happened, though, is that Reguilon eventually signed for Spurs, and that there was this kind of narrative that played out that Spurs had somehow beaten Man United to the signing of Sergio Reguilon, and how embarrassing that was for Man United. Now, in reality, United had looked at him. They were looking for a left-back. They looked at him, they scouted him, they did all the kind of the due diligence. It went to the agent. The agent then, obviously wanted people to know that United were looking at his client. And so everybody knew. But United, in reality, had looked at him briefly and moved on really quickly. But there was a kind of narrative that built up. And that just shows you how difficult it is to kind of find out exactly what is happening in the transfer market. There's so much information flying around with hundreds of different people. As I said at the start, it's a minefield kind of wade through all that and actually get to the point where player A is going to sign for Club B, because there's so much that goes into these transfer windows. It's almost impossible to kind of, like you said at the start, to kind of decide between what's right and what is just pure speculation.
The funny thing about Reguilón is that they ended up signing 2 years later anyway, so Spurs did beat them to sign in just by about 2 years. I mean, the situation with transfers, it's a bit like when they say don't ask people how they make sausages because you don't really know what goes into them. And it is a bit like that with transfers. I mean, there's a big transfer that happened in the summer window. Well, big in terms of a big name involving big clubs, and basically the supposed interest of one club was used to basically help push into another club, that the other club was thinking, we better get this deal done because the other club is in for it, when the other club wasn't really in for it. So it's happened so many times. I remember when Man United signed Alexis Sanchez from Arsenal and they beat Man City to the signing. When Man City missed out, we were told that actually it's not a done deal to United yet because Chelsea wanted him. We thought, Chelsea? So we spoke to Chelsea and they were like, not interested in him whatsoever. So people at clubs attached to players themselves will try and put out a narrative which suits their ends, which if they've missed out on a player, they'll make it sound like they haven't missed out on a player, or that a club that has tried to sign a player tried a lot harder to sign a player than they really have done. Agents will use certain clubs, and it's usually Man United, because Man United, as we know, over the last few years have been scattergun, shall we say, in the transfer market. So link a player with Man United, it automatically gets them lots of headlines, it gets them lots of, profile, and it puts their availability out there. So it's hard. It's hard to, work out what is believable and what is not. Clubs find it harder and harder to keep track of all this transfer speculation. Some clubs are better than others. Some clubs are very good in the sense of, we're not interested in that player, here's why. Other clubs will completely ignore your attempts to stand it up, which means that, you're lacking that kind of, you're making an honest kind of query to a club, are you interested, and getting nothing back. So that fuels the speculation, because why the club's not engaging. So it's difficult. And I think, and what also, what can be right today might be wrong tomorrow. And I think fans who read about transfers, if you write on a Monday that X club wants this player and it sounds for a different club at the end of the week, doesn't mean it was wrong on the Monday. That was the information at the time, and it's just changed. And it's
and I think sort of related to that, I think the language of transfers is very important. I think this gets lost when aggregators, for example, sort of pick up and extrapolate information from outlets and report it in a different way. So, for example, you can sort of say that a club is looking at a player, and you might write that as, Arsenal are exploring the possibility of signing X, but that can then get lifted and taken as, well, Arsenal want to sign this player. And it's different, and it's nuanced, but it's different. And there's so much noise around, and I genuinely don't think social media has helped with this, that the language of transfers from people who actually know what's going on is very, very detailed, and it's very specific, and it's very tightly calibrated to the situation that they're reporting on. And to your point, Mark, that means it can change. And there are very few good transfer reporters who write in absolute fact about a transfer. You very, very rarely see it. And I think that has been lost a little bit in the sort of rush to be first, the rush to be, the rush to generate or piggyback the traffic that transfer stories generate. We all know how important they are. Transfer information is valuable to everybody, to all the actors involved. It's invaluable to the transfer itself. As you both said, if a big club is linked to this player, another club that's trying to sign that player, well, suddenly the price might go up if people believe it. It's very, very difficult, therefore, to separate truth from fiction. And one thing I would also say is that, even the clubs are involved in this. The clubs are complicit in this to some extent. There was a player who moved between two London clubs a couple of years ago, and I had briefings from both ends about the deal, about the composition, and ultimately the fee. And the club's valuation of the completed transfer was £2.5 million different. And one club was absolutely adamant that it was £2.5 more. Funnily enough, the selling club. And the club that had bought were adamant it was £2.5 million lower. Now, puts you in a very difficult position as a journalist then, because if both clubs are saying that and the agent is effectively leaving it to the clubs, then you are in a position where you have to make a judgment call on how that information is given to you, the track record of the people giving it to you, and weighing up, all of the information you've had all the way along through the transfer. So, if the clubs are doing it, and I'll give you another example. There was a player that a London club signed probably 4 or 5 years ago now, who was offered to almost every Premier League club earlier in the summer, defender. And he was offered around left, right and centre, and everybody thought, not sure, let's see where we are later in the window. And this London club signed him right towards the end of the window. And then I read a couple of weeks later this story about the inside story of how they tracked this player all summer, and they've been in negotiations, and they'd known this player since he was 12, and they'd scouted, he's been to his house, and all of this kind of stuff. And you sort of thought, no, you signed that player right at the end of the window because you needed a body. That's what happened.
Well, that's it. People are spoon-fed sometimes, and it's difficult when you know where it's come from a certain end and the narrative wants to be controlled. But on the clubs, you're right about the clubs. I remember I was walking down the main street in St. Petersburg during Euro 2020, whatever it was, summer 2021. And I just did a story saying that Man United had agreed a deal to sign Rafael Varane from Real Madrid. And United were hot on, no, we're not. We're not signing Rafael Varane. It's not done. We're not there in it whatsoever. And I was told by somebody who is a really good source, and it happened about 5 or 6 weeks later. But at the time, United were adamant, we are not signing Rafael Varane. Not happening. But I was told by somebody who knew the deal had been agreed, and it happened about a month later. But at the time, it would have been perhaps embarrassing for Man United if they failed to get the deal over the line. But you are told by people at the clubs that the players signing for, no, it's not happening, when it does. So I'm not saying people are lying, because that would be a bit harsh, deflecting maybe. But
they're protecting something fragile, aren't they? Yeah. Because they might want to do something, but at that moment in time, it's not in the club's interest for that to be in the public domain. Now that then now you could call that lying if you like, because you've gone to them with a specific query and they've told you it isn't happening when it was. Now that could be described as anything from lying to serving the club's best interest to obfuscation to however you want to phrase it. But these are the challenges that the people like us who are doing our level best to try and report the accurate information that we face on a daily basis. And I think it's probably why none of us particularly look forward to either the January or the summer windows.
I think maybe some fans maybe underestimate how important the narrative is, because I imagine there are some sort of football club fans who are listening to this thinking, well, what does it matter? You've got a guy from the club speaking to a guy from another club and then speaking to the agent. What does it matter what's written and reported? Well, it matters a lot. And you mentioned there sort of instances about stories that have come out, but there have been sort of examples of a club signing or selling a player and the transfer fee being inflated in the media, and then that same club trying to buy another player, and that selling club has gone to the other club and said, well, no, I just read that you sold that player for 15 million and I want an extra sort of 3 million on top for my player because I've read that it's 15 million, and the other club has said, well, it's not, it's closer to 10. So all of this narrative stuff, all the reporting, all the stuff that you read, all plays into the overall transfer, and it does matter. It's not a case of reporters kind of running around, inventing stuff off the top of their head for the sake of it. I mean, the whole narrative around transfers and what is reported from both sides, like you just said, James, about what the selling club is saying in terms of numbers compared to what the buying club is saying in terms of numbers, it all matters and it all plays into it. And ultimately, you're right, they're all protecting something fragile, and they all want the best deal for themselves. And all of these little things, as inconsequential as it might sound to sort of the casual fan, it all plays into it.
Yeah, and just one final thing I'd add on that is the point I was making about the sort of the inside story. So I'm not necessarily criticising that, because they, you know, as reporters, even if they're spinning a narrative, as Rob says, we have to report some of that, because that is what the club is telling us. You know, if we start editing all of that out, now it's our responsibility to frame that within the context of the wider picture, which is obviously multiple sourced information. That's kind of the nature of journalism, right? But we can't ignore it completely, because that is the club's position. That they are suggesting that they track this player for a long time. Well, then fair enough. If that is what they want out there, then we have to reflect that. But we can, you know, validate that or invalidate that with information from other people. But that's, you know, we're getting into a journalism 101 class here, which is probably something for another day. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks all for this week. Thanks to Rob, thanks to Mark, and everyone else who's part of the show. The show will be available every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts, and in full on YouTube. We'll be back next week, so see you then.